You have Michael's phone?
Yeah.
Okay, Michael, go ahead.
Hello. So this is a recap of what we did last week. So I started off with 52 pounds of raspberries, and we ended up with 10.5 bricks until we added the water, which brought it down to like 6.5 bricks. And I went over the formula for adding sugar to get it up to around 10, 20 bricks, or not 10, 20, 21, 22 bricks with the sugar. And you can either use the corn sugar or you can use granulated sugar. So different schools of thought on both, but that's personal choice and what you have available. Anyway, after we put in the yeast, the gopher, and right now I'm having to deal with fruit flies in the winery, one of the big hazards of running wine. So I did all of my fermentation inside that big mesh bag, and it took me over an hour to really wring out as much juice as I could get out of it. So it's something I didn't want to have to do in front of everybody here, because it's just a lot of time of me slowly squeezing everything out, but I ended up getting a fairly decent cake out of that. We ended up with, there's a mark on the bucket, so just over 9 gallons of a basic juice from everything, but now there's going to be a layer of sludge at the bottom, and that is a lot of dead yeast cells, other components that the yeast have broken down that are just going to slowly settle out. And what we're going to do now is rack the wine off of that. One of the things that we didn't talk about the first time was sanitation. So when you're putting fruit into the bucket, you're adding yeast, there's a whole lot of things going on that there's already, small bugs, small microbes going on, and you're creating a big microbe soup. So having your bucket clean when you start, all that stuff is important, but it's much more important now that it's a finished wine and that you want to keep it as clean. So what we're going to do is rack it into this bucket and into these glass carboys. So there's a couple of different siphons. So I use Star San a lot. It's and this is available at John's Homebrew, and there is One Step, and Star San is it's a kind of foamy. You gotta let the stuff sit in it for about 2 minutes for it to sanitize things. The other one, I have mine in a different container, but it's called One Step, and it is a product that's a lot like OxyClean. It leaves that slick feeling on your hands when you get your hands in it, but it doesn't have the little blue crystals that OxyClean has. This is designed to work in a winery or brewery to help clean things. So this is the other product that I use for sanitation. So these carboys have been cleaned in the past. They have a little bit of SO2 in them, and I will add a little bit more when I go to do the racking. And this is to help kill off any yeast that are still trying to be active, and to help kill off any bacteria that are wanting to now feast themselves on the alcohol or any other nutrients that are still available. Couple of different methods. This is one of the products that John has, and this is a really cool siphoning thing because it's self-priming. So you just stick it in there, give it a couple of pumps, and it immediately starts coming out. Then you have the exact same thing, but there is no automatic pump on it. There you usually have to do the old blow or suck the air out of it, get the thing started, and then quickly put it in. But we'll use this one today. Just a second. Another important feature are clamps. So you can hold things in very particular spots and at levels until you're ready to go.
Will you do the bricks first?
Yes.
That's it. Where do you go?
We talk about the
Nobody wants to stay where they're put. All right. There's been a bunch of other questions about hydrometers and how to use them and the importance. So when it comes to finishing, I have a narrow band hydrometer. It starts at 5 bricks and goes to -5. The reason why I use this at the end is because the gap or the numbers are much more spaced apart, and it's a lot easier for me to read than the traditional hydrometer. Everything's a little much tighter, closer together, and it's just easier to use when you're at the end to use the narrow band hydrometer. So we just start off by thiefing out, and you don't want to run the thief too far down because you don't want to get it into the goopy stuff. You just want the nice clean juice. So this hydrometer right now is reading at 0. So sugar is more dense than water. So at 0, water will register at 0. With sugar in it, it would push this thing way up higher because the sugar water is more dense. And then as the yeast goes through and digests all the sugar and turns it into alcohol, alcohol is less dense than water. And so usually, and depending upon what this thing is appeared to have finished, but it's at 0. My regular wines in the winery are usually at -1, -1.5, anywhere to -2. But because I didn't go over heavy on the sugar, there might be a little bit of residual sugar in this, more than normal, but also the alcohol content in this is not going to be nearly as high as if I had raised it up to 25 bricks, like a lot of my wines have been at. Is there any questions directly that anybody would like to ask? The other thing I'm not going to do right now, but we talked about the pH, and this is one of my early pH meters. John has other pH meters that are similar to this for sale at his shop. This is a good basic one, but a pH meter that the more digits you have past the decimal point is better. So instead of it just saying 3.5, having one that says 3.54 or whatever to that second place is really beneficial in both your scales for weighing things out and on your pH meter. Because pH, without going into a whole lot of detail, is this whole exponential logarithm that is just pH of 4 is not one notch above, it's like 100 times more potent than 3. It's not just a little bit more potent. It's 100 times, and then it just keeps getting bigger and bigger as you go. So right now, what I'm going to do is pull the protective cover off. For 6 gallons of, I want 12 milliliters to go to 30 parts per million. And that's a good, safe starting point. And this is the 12 or 10% solution that I made up before and talked about. So I just so now all we have to do is with this nice neat, you just give it a couple of pumps, boom, it starts siphoning.
It's called rack.
Well, racking. Yeah, so we're racking off the heavy lees from the primary fermentation. So I'm going to run, I've got a little over 9. I figure there's probably going to be about 2 gallons of dead yeast and other things in the bottom of this. So I know I'm going to be needing this other 3-gallon carboy, but it's not going to be full right off the bat. But all of this is going to settle. So even though you rack it off of this and you have all that sludge at the bottom, the next time, you know, in a month, you're going to see a whole new layer of more stuff that has settled out.
Michael, Chris asked, how far off the bottom is the pickup?
I started probably about halfway down in the beginning, and then I slowly will push it down and then pay attention to the tube. And when you start seeing cloud, it get cloudy, that means you're right above the sludge. So then I usually back it off. And when we get closer to that, we'll do a zoom in, and you can see that we're picking up some of that cloudy stuff. On the end of the bottom, there's these little caps, and these little caps are helping to, that was on the bottom of the racking cane when I started. And what it does is, one, direct the fluid from the top down into it, so it's not like pulling straight up off the bottom. And the other thing is, it also helps to keep some of the, if there's seeds or other large junk in there, it catches it in that little tip. But the tip pretty much prevents it from pulling sediment straight up from the bottom up into it like a vacuum. So instead, it pulls down and then up into the tube. And so you don't get as much of a waste. And then after the hydrometer, you can just pour that. Now, the reason why I pour it into here and not back into the bucket is, if I had poured this back into the bucket, I would stir up all that stuff that settled down, and now you've stirred it up by dumping it in, and then you've now clouded up your wine that you've been letting it sit for a while so it settles out. At this point, it's kind of just this slow waiting of racking things out. And like I said, you can just slowly, I don't know, you can get a good picture of it. As I slowly lower it down, I just keep waiting until I see some haze pop off. And if I don't, okay, I got it down to about as far as I can get it with the clamp. So when that gets to the point where I still have plenty of wine and then I'm ready to rack, that's when I take the clamp off and I have to manually hold it to the side of the bucket and slowly lower it down so that it doesn't suck up too much goop.
While you're waiting for that, you want to talk about like sweetness levels and how to stop it or back sweeten it?
Most commercial wineries, when they have big tanks that have glycol jackets, basically refrigerated liquid around the jackets, and so when they are wanting to stop a wine or make it semi-sweet, they literally just run the glycol jackets on full tilt and they chill the wine down so much that the yeast stop. And then they settle out and then they'll rack it off and run it through filters to filter out all the yeast and bacteria. Home winemakers, we don't have that option. Rarely do we have that option. So if you want to sweeten your wine, there's a couple of things you can do. And the easiest is just add, once it's completed, you add a little bit of sugar up to your point of where you want the sweetness. Once you do that, you want to make sure that you end up having to use
Sorbate?
Yeah, potassium sorbate. It has a bunch of different names that it goes under. That you want to really read up on how to use it, because if you use too much, you tend to have a bubblegum flavoring to your wine. If you use too little, and yeast and bacteria or malolactic bacteria will start consuming it, and which it's supposed to. So if the population of bacteria and yeast is large enough, it will actually help consume the sorbate, and it'll give your wine a geranium flavor and aroma. And if you've ever played in your flower bed with geraniums, it's not the most pleasant smell or flavor that you would want for a wine. So you got to really, take the time to read up on it and how to use it and how to use it correctly. Basically, you're going to want to make sure you use plenty of SO2 in the beginning before you add it, so that you have killed off as much of the population as you can. And again, you don't want to overdo it, because you can then have a sulfury smell to your wine. So those are all the little different things to consider.
You want to show the different airlocks or the bungs?
Oh, yes.
Just thinking what you could talk about while you're watching.
While we're watching paint dry.
Daydream.
So this is the one I like to use the most. And this is another style that you can use. Both have their advantages and disadvantages.
No.
So the one that you're looking at right now has the advantage that air can kind of go back and forth, but through either alcohol or sulfite solution. What it does is that when you have a high and low pressure system come through, there is a tendency for stuff to go back and forth. So in this particular style, if you get a high enough pressure system, it will literally push whatever fluid you have in there as a stop, will get sucked right down into your carboy. And then when a low pressure system comes through, it could literally just bleed out wine into it. So stable environment, something that's not, that's a nice one there. The S-curve one, I like usually I'll do that in the beginning when it's still bubbling and degassing, because it just gives everything a little more room to play with. And I have a full assortment of various bungs, ones that even fit into wine bottles. So sometimes you're racking out of a carboy and you have just enough to fill a wine bottle. And so they do make ones that fit into wine bottles. Huh? Oh. And this is another one that, this is a silicone one. It's got a little flap cap on it, and it's designed to allow air pressure to build up inside and let air out. And then when high pressure system comes in, it prevents air from being pushed back into it. That's when you still have wine degassing and you can't always put airlock on it. The other thing is, otherwise I do, like all these over here have solid bungs on them, and the bungs are taped down because during a low pressure system, it will literally blow the bungs off. So if you don't put tape on it, when you come back into the winery one morning, you'll notice that there's no bungs on top of them. And you gotta go searching for the bungs, and you gotta sulfite it because you don't know how long it's been off and how many fruit flies may have found their way in. Okay, so we're starting to get down here. What gallon level are we at now? We're at.
Michael, Paul has a question. Is there a danger of contamination if there is overpressure during the initial fermentation process, but the bungs have stayed intact?
So during initial fermentation, most of my stuff is done in buckets, where you have the lids don't seal overly tight. I mean, they're sealed, but air can get in and out. And so I don't use bungs and airlocks for my primary fermentation. For those who are doing them in carboys, yes, you want to use a bung and an airlock, and a high pressure system coming in is not going to affect it much because the amount of CO2 that's being produced by the yeast will out pressure anything else. I mean, it's producing a lot of CO2. It is pushing it out. So during primary fermentation, no, there isn't a fear of contamination. Okay, so now we're getting to the point where we gotta pay attention because this carboy is starting to get full, and at the same time, I'm starting to get down to the down to the level to where it's gonna open up on the bottom of the tube. So you gotta kind of it's helpful to have somebody else help watching with you because you get so focused on one thing and all of a sudden you have wine all over the floor. So, or you're not paying attention and you're watching one thing and all of a sudden now you're sucking up goop that you didn't want. So this is the stage where you want to be a little more attentive as to what's going on between the two.
How often do you rack?
Pretty much, because you'll have these in a glass carboy at what you want to rack. When you start seeing a fair amount of buildup on the bottom, you start seeing an inch or so of accumulation on the bottom, that would be a good time to rack. Get it off the stuff that's down there on the bottom, and then go to and put it into a new container. And so like with this one, it's going to be a 6. The 3 is not going to be completely full. I'll have to do keep a tight eye on the 3. I got argon that I put on top of it. It's a neutral gas that helps prevent oxidation. And then when I rack the next time, I will use what's in the 3 gallon to help top off the 6 gallon. And then I'll probably figure out how many gallon jugs I need to finish it off. put what was left in the 3-gallon into to keep it fresh. So we're starting it. Oh, just a second. The other thing is if you have a lift table, because the difference in height between where you're racking from and where you're racking to has a big impact on how fast it goes. So in the beginning it was going fairly quick. Now it's slowed down a little bit. There it went. So this thing was down there pretty close, and now you can start to see when I bring it down. There it is, there's that cloud. So when you see that, then you bring it back up a little bit. So what you want to try to do is keep as much of that headspace to a minimum. And in this first racking, it's not that big of a deal if you pick up some of the sediments off the bottom, because there's a lot more stuff that's going to keep settling out. And so right now it's more try to get as much of the good juice. If you get a little bit of the fluffy sediments, it's not that big of a deal. It will settle out. And then the next time you rack it, you rack off of that. So each time you rack it, you're racking off a little bit more of the crud, and then eventually you'll have there won't be anything to rack off.
So we have about 10 minutes left in the Zoom call because I just did like the short version. I actually set up a second one if people want to do a separate little Q&A with Michael after the time runs out with this. So what I'll do is I'll put the meeting ID and password in the chat section. If anybody has any questions while we're doing this, but it's really just kind of wrapping this piece up. But we have that other option for you if you want to have some extended chatting with Michael.
So a lot of what goes on in winemaking is, one, you need lots of research to know. You can have 100 people, or you can have 5 winemakers with the exact same batch of fruit, and you can end up with 5 completely different flavored wines, styles of wine. So what you got to do is take the time to do a little research as to what sounds good that this person does versus what somebody else does, and why they do it that way, and then decide what style you want.
So Michael,
yeah,
what can you do if your alcohol level is too high, and when should you do it?
Your alcohol level's too high. After the whole thing is done, you can water it down a little bit. Usually, that's why in the beginning you don't want to go too high with the bricks when you're doing it, and you want to balance all that stuff out in the beginning, so that you're not making compromises after the fact. So by not getting your sugar levels too high and not and getting your acid balanced in the beginning allows you. Oh, so come in, Hunter. So
sorry.
Take a picture so you can start to see all the yeast and everything that's down at the bottom. So that's that bottom sludge. Some of it's rather fluffy, some of it is kind of thin. So, or thicker and heavier. So the heavier stuff will be down at the bottom, the lighter stuff up at the top. And so what we're doing is we're just going to keep on pulling out as much. So this is now down in the bottom to the bucket. And it's going to slowly, as this last little bit of wine, you can start to see stuff traveling towards this. And like I said, this first round, it's not that big of a deal if you pick up some of this stuff. It's going to fall out eventually on the sequential rackings. But right now, you don't want to waste all that, what juice there is in there.
So when you finish it, somebody asked if you would show how to set up the Zig Zag Lock bung.
Oh, yes. Okay, so then once you start seeing too much sludge go into it, you just pull the thing out. And my sink is filling up fast.
Whose fault is that?
No, right now it will be your fault.
What?
Yeah.
How dare.
So I'm going to use these because they're really quick and easy to do right now. And then later on, I will assess what to do, but that will help keep fruit flies and other stuff out of it. So this is the S type, or they come in glass. They're really fancy, but they're a bigger pain to clean. And these, if they get too ugly and junky, then I don't feel bad throwing this little piece of plastic away versus a really cool looking glass one. So on here, there's two little things and it says max. And so what you do, and here typically what I use is a 1% solution of sulfite. And what you'll do is you'll just slowly pour this in and you rock it back and forth a little bit to where it comes out right close to the max line. And then what this will do is allow a small amount of air or gases to bubble out. And then if you do have a big high pressure system come through, it will allow stuff to go the other way without dumping this fluid into your carboy. You can also fill it with vodka. But anything, basically all you want is to help. You don't want mold and stuff to grow in there, so that's why you use alcohol or you use sulfite. But that's how you set that up. And then you put it on your bung with a hole in it, put it in there, and then you're ready to go.
You have to change that out?
Yes. I would, if you start to see the fluid level get down low, just pour it out. And pouring it out is a little interesting because you got to keep rocking it back and forth to get it to pour out. And then run clean water through it, and then reload it with vodka or solution, 1% or 10% solution to help keep it sanitized. And any fruit flies that do get little holes in the top of this thing, but fruit flies do get through those little holes.
Did you answer the question about if the alcohol level is too high? When you should do it?
Well, I answered that a little bit by saying that, one, that's why you want to balance things out before you start. And then if you have to, you can water it down, and you don't have to use water to water it down. You can use a different fruit wine or some other stuff that you have available to just thin it down a little bit.
Alrighty. So we only have just a couple minutes left. Is there anything you want to say for wrapping up? Like how many? Like let it sit a couple months. Settle.
Yeah. So for set at this point, I'll monitor it for you put it someplace where you'll see it periodically. Don't just throw it in the back of the closet and forget about it. But don't have it sitting out where it's in the sunlight or anything. That's